circulatory system. We're going to start with this system because the circulatory system is sort of like the connection between all the parts of the body, one of the connections anyway. Your nervous system is also a form of connecting one part of the body to the other. But the circulatory system is sort of like the taxi or bus service for your body, right? It's what moves things around and gets things to different places. And so therefore, the circulatory system actually interacts with all the other systems. There has to be a bus station at every system, in the digestive system, in the endocrine system, the immune system, and so on, to move things around and get things where they have to be. And so if we start with the circulatory system, it kind of makes sense, because we'll see how it then sort of blends in or attaches to all the other systems. Okay. Now, what we want to do, of course, in grade 11 biology is focus primarily on humans, but also have a basic idea of just general systems, right? Circulatory systems. So if we look across the whole animal world, okay, if we have a one-celled creature, here's a little one-celled creature, and he's got stuff inside his cytoplasm. Well, if he's living by himself, then things are going to move around inside of him by diffusion, right? He doesn't need anything, and he's also very small, so it's not very far from here to here, right? We're talking microscopic. And so the movement of stuff around a single cell is pretty straightforward. The cytoplasm and the cytosol, the fluid inside, is moved and streamed. Not only is there diffusion happening, but cells can sort of use their cellular skeletons, their cytoskeletons, and they can cause currents to flow in their cytosol, the juice that's inside them. And so for single-celled animals, there's basically, they rely on diffusion and what's called cytoplasmic streaming. That's the movement of fluids in the cell, right? Sort of causing them to sort of, I don't know, you can think of them as currents in the cell that shift and flow and push things around. Cytoplasmic streaming. And of course, the other thing about a cell is no part of the cell is ever very far from the outside world. So if there's something outside, like oxygen, that you want to bring into the cell, it diffuses across the membrane, and it's in there, and it can move around very easily. So a single cell doesn't require anything more than this to get stuff around, because of its size primarily. But when you get many cells together in a large group, we begin to have a problem. And the problem is that, first of all, the cells near the middle are much farther away from the outside world, aren't they? So if you had something like oxygen, and you had to get it into all the cells, well, it might diffuse into these cells very easily, but then it's a very slow process for it to diffuse through the membranes, diffuse, and make its way to the center, which means the cells in the center are not going to be getting much oxygen because of their distance from the outside world, right? And so diffusion isn't going to be a good enough way to get things around. And also, think about it, this is now a long way. Diffusion takes a long time. If you pee in a pool, it takes a few minutes for that pee to make its way to the other side of the pool. That's too slow for a large organism that needs things to be moved around more quickly. And so for a larger organism, let me just draw a big line here. Larger organisms need a system to transport whatever, transport things that are needed, or wastes that need to be shuttled off to be excreted, right? It's like managing, just like a city. Think about a city. if I live in my house, I can handle all my little jobs. I can put my garbage out. I can go to the grocery store and get my food. And I can do everything I need to do in my home. But in a city, we need a specialized service to pick up garbage. Otherwise, everybody would be dumping it all over. It would be a mess. And how would we get it to the dump? And it wouldn't be very efficient. We need a specialized service to move people around, buses and taxis and roads and cars. We need a specialized service to take care of a lot of these things. So the larger organisms have what we call circulatory systems. Oops, how did I do that? I don't know how I put that back. I don't know. Okay, well, I guess we're on this side now. There we go. Let's do that. Nope. Okay, so let's look at some of this varying possibilities. Okay. Obviously, just like cells that are small and don't need a circulatory system, as they get bigger, they need new ways to move things around. Different animals and plants also have different ways of moving things around that does depend a little bit on their size. So the smallest little animals, like little insects and bugs and things like that, their circulatory systems don't have to be quite as robust because it doesn't take as much to move stuff around the body of a tiny little beetle as it would, say, an elephant, right? And so we see different kinds of circulatory systems. And so for some animals, they have what's called an open circulatory system. An open circulatory system. So what that means is, let me just draw a sort of a bug here. Right? There. That's some kind of bug. The head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So what happens here is there might be a sort of a pumping heart that pumps blood into blood vessels. But the blood vessels go to various regions of the body, and then they just kind of open up. They just kind of open up so that the blood spills into the body cavity, and then it just kind of diffuses around to all the cells nearby. And this works if you're small. So this is an open system. So what it means is that there are only some blood vessels and blood is allowed to bathe certain tissues. To bathe tissues. So it would be kind of like if you had a heart that pumped blood down to your whole stomach region, and then all of a sudden it just leaked out of the tissues, or out of the blood vessels, I mean, and just kind of spilled over your spleen, and it was like all your body, all your parts were just kind of floating in blood. And then what would happen is, at some other point, the blood would be regathered up into another blood vessel from this wash, and then directed back to the heart, where it could be pumped again. So it's kind of like a system that has some blood vessels to direct the blood to regions of the body. But a lot of the time, the blood is just kind of sloshing around inside there as a bathing, washing fluid. And while it's washing and doing that, it's able to absorb or deliver different materials to those particular organs. That's called an open system. And we see that in smaller animals. We see it in animals like worms and insects, animals that are fairly small. It doesn't work so well the bigger you get because, again, it relies on, in this region, it relies on diffusion in the smaller regions to make the stuff move in and out. Larger animals and more sort of, I guess you could say, animals that appear later in the evolutionary scale or the evolutionary pathway have what's called a closed circulatory system. What that means is that all of the blood is always contained inside some kind of blood vessel. It's never freely bathing, right? So we'll just write all blood is always contained in blood vessels. Now that does make it harder. If you think about it, then how does the stuff get in and out of the blood? Blood vessels. And that's the trick, right? We have to kind of look at how the stuff that we need gets in and out of the blood. Here in this version, it's quite easy to see that it just spills out and it floats around and diffuses into tissues and out of tissues, and then it's gathered back up and repumped. But what happens with these closed systems? So those are the systems we're going to look at in sort of more detail. The human system, of course, is a closed system. All right, so let's go to the human system, and then what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the variations we see in other animals. So let's look at human circulation. Okay. Large animals have to have a well-developed heart. For some small animals, like a worm, you can just have an artery with a little bit of extra muscle around it that can squeeze a little bit and push blood. But in order to do it, in order to do justice to a large organism like humans, or dogs and cats and rats and elephants and things like that, we need to have a well-developed heart. So let's talk about the human heart, and then we'll see how some of the other hearts of other animals are a little bit different. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw ourselves a picture. And remember, when we draw this picture, we're not trying to produce a beautiful artistic rendition. We're drawing it to help our brain focus on it. And as we draw it and talk about it and label it, our brain becomes more comfortable with the concept. So this picture doesn't have to look great because we have the internet for really good pictures. But we're going to try and draw a heart. And we're going to draw sort of a cutaway version of the heart. And it's not easy to draw. So let's take, I'll try to do it in this black color. And what we're going to do is we're going to go like this. So if you follow me and do the same sort of things, draw a little sort of thing right here like this, and then a little arc like that, and then go all the way down sort of like this, around, and right up to about here. Okay, and then just do a little sort of loop like that. Draw something that looks like that. Okay. Okay. Next, I'll take a different color to help it stand out. And we're going to draw right here sort of a big red like this, and then a little up there guy, and then another little thing with another little up there guy, maybe like this. And then this is going to just curve around to about there for now. So I'll draw that. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a blue now. Actually, I'll take a red, and I'm going to do a little thing right here, like that. And then the blue is going to sort of come out like this. Like that. As if it was going sort of through that loop, like a donut. And then this is going to break off into a couple branches over there like that. Okay, now the red part tucks underneath that, and actually it's going to come around like this and come down like that. And it's actually going to, let's just go that far for now. Okay? In fact, we can join these up too, something like that. Oh, wait, no. Oh, shoot. Wait, take that part out. My mistake. Oh, rats. Yeah, we got to go back. I don't want that there. I'm going to keep undoing. It's a little bit tricky to get this to work. So, yeah, what we want to do is we want to bring it. Yeah, let's bring this down. Whoops, let's go back to red. Let's just bring that down a little bit more for now. Something like that. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now, over here, we have to draw the rest of this blue guy, but he's going to be behind something else. So now we're going to draw sort of up here, like this, a blue thing. And then down here, sort of over here, another blue thing. And we're going to put a little hole here and a little hole right there. So far, so good. Okay, now we're going to divide up the big black part of the heart. So we're going to go over here like this, leave a space. We're going to sort of block this off like that. And then maybe in yellow, I'm going to put this little sort of thing like that. Okay, so far so good. Now we're going to take this little red section. We're also going to have to cut this part. So we're going to put a big kind of right about here. We're going to put a big divider. Okay, and then on this side we're going to have another divider, but we have to sort of bring it like this, and then we'll put a little squiggle, and we'll sort of just divide up that section. Okay, then we're going to have another red section, and over here we're going to have another little set of blood vessels going in there, and we're going to put two little holes right there, or maybe one big hole right there. And then over here we're going to have two little vessels that go like this, sort of cut off. Maybe we could draw these as little circles to show that they're cut off little blood vessels. And then we're going to go here and put another little sort of circle right there. Now this blue guy, we're going to kind of angle him down, right? And he's tucked in behind, so he's going to sort of come out. There's going to be a little sort of circle right there. All right, so let's talk about what we've got here. The heart, the human heart has 4 sections, okay? If you look at the black, you can kind of make out 4 different areas, right? So at the bottom are the 2 areas that are called ventricles. And they are the pumping, they're the stronger pumps. Now, with a human body, it's confusing when you talk about right and left, because if I were to draw an arrow here and put this over here, oh, I should have done that in black. Hang on. If I were to draw a black arrow to label this section right here, it's a ventricle, and you would want to call it the right ventricle because it's on the right-hand side. But when we do biology, we always do left and right from the perspective of the thing itself. So you have to imagine if I was standing here and that was my heart right in front of you, that would be my left side, wouldn't it? It's backwards. So this is called the left ventricle on this side. You have to label right and left from the perspective of the heart itself. So it's the heart's left side, not your left side. Left ventricle. And then on the other side, we have what's called the right ventricle. So the nice thing about the heart is it's got pieces, and half of it is left and half of it is right. So it's easy to remember. Okay. Then we have the two areas on top. So I'll label them right here. This one would be called the right atrium. And then over here, I'll go underneath here, the left atrium. So those are the four main chambers of the heart. The atria and the ventricles. And there's a left and a right. So what we have to understand is how they all work together to move the blood. Now, the blood has to be moved in two specific ways. Part of the heart's job is to get blood to the lungs, because that's where the oxygen comes from. So the right side of the heart is actually the lung pump. And so if we start on the right side of the heart, right here, the reason I drew it in blue is because traditionally blue is the color we use for deoxygenated blood, or blood that's low in oxygen. And that's what's happening over here. So I'm going to shift to crayon now to give it some shading. And what we have is, in this right ventricle right here, we have blood without much oxygen. That blood has arrived here by coming through these big blue blood vessels. Now this blood vessel here, I'm sorry, no, that's not right. Hang on. My mistake. We won't worry about where that blood arrives from yet. We'll start here and we'll worry about that later because it's going to get a bit confusing. So here's what this side of the heart does. The blood is here. It gets pumped up this hole, which connects to this blue over here. And it goes this way. All right? It also, we forgot to draw. I got to go back and add another thing. So back to our pen here. Pen. And on this side, there's another set. This blue guy is going along like this over here and branching over here like that in behind. It's like a T shape. And so if we go back to our crayon, that blood is going that way, but it's also going up the hole, and it's going this way, right there. So it's moving out this way and out here. And it's going to the lungs. And so because it's going to the lungs, we call this blood vessel the pulmonary artery. That's its name. It leads to the lungs. So let's label it with black. And of course, there's two sides. So this is the left pulmonary, artery. That's the blue one. And it branches on its way to the lungs. So the blood is on its way to the lungs. The other side, of course, is the right pulmonary artery. Now my picture is going to get a little confusing. So right pulmonary artery. I'm writing small, so you may not be able to see it. But it says right pulmonary artery, which is this one, right? This other blue one. So really we're talking about where the crayon is, the crayon shading. And this blood is going to the lungs. It's going this way across our body, right out to our lungs. So it doesn't have very far to go. It's a very short trip. And for that reason, this right ventricle is a smaller muscular section of the heart. It's not as strong. It's a little pump because it's only going to the lungs. Once that blood goes to the lungs, it picks up oxygen, and then it has to come back to the heart because the next job of the heart is to pump it out to the rest of the body using the other side. So what happens is, back to the crayon again, once it's finished getting oxygen at the lungs, it comes back into these little red guys who are on their way back. And of course, those two things are emptying into this area up here, the left atrium. That's what those little holes mean. So they're going behind the heart, and they're entering in to the left atrium. So we have to give these names. Traditionally, any vessel that goes away from the heart, where blood flows out, is called an artery. And any vessel that has blood flowing into the heart is called a vein. So veins are called veins because all the blood inside your veins is on its way back to the heart. All the blood inside all of your arteries is on its way away from the heart towards the body, right? So these red guys just below the pulmonary arteries, guess what their name is? You can guess. They're called the pulmonary veins. So we can squeeze that in maybe. I'm not sure on my picture how I can do that because I don't have the same room you have. But right here and right here, right, maybe if I go under, this would be the right pulmonary vein. And this would be the left pulmonary vein. Okay? Right. Okay. So now the blood has arrived in the left atrium. So if we just stop right here, the heart pump works like this. Blood from the right ventricle is pumped into the pulmonary arteries, off to the lungs. It returns through the pulmonary veins and collects in the left atrium. Now it has oxygen in it. So it's ready to go to the body. And so what happens next is the blood moves through this little yellow guy. This little yellow guy is called a valve. And this particular valve, I'm going to draw it in yellow so that it stands out. I hope you can see it right here. That's called the mitral valve. M-I-T-R-A-L. And what a valve does is it makes the flow one way. If blood tries to go backwards, the valve will slam shut. So these valves mean that the blood can only go from the left atrium down to the left ventricle, not the other way around. Okay? So now that the blood is in the left ventricle is the largest part of the heart, and it's a very powerful muscle, and its job is to squeeze that blood hard enough to move it all the way around the rest of the body. So the blood then travels, crayon, the blood then travels from here, and it gets pumped up through this big, thick artery. Now the artery splits. Part of it goes up through here. The other part circles down behind the heart and actually would come out way down here at the bottom and go on down towards the rest of the body. That big artery is called the aorta. It's got a special name. So if we were to label it, it's called the aorta. And it has two branches. So there's aorta. It has the ascending aorta, which is bringing that fresh oxygen blood up to the arms, the neck, the head. And then it branches down behind the heart and brings blood in the descending aorta towards the abdomen, the liver, the spleen, and all that, and your legs and everything down below. So it's sort of going in behind there and taking off towards the body. Okay, now all that has to happen is once the blood goes to the body, it interacts with the cells and tissues, and it delivers its oxygen, and it picks up wastes, carbon dioxide, and so on. And then it brings it back to the heart. So the returning part is where we started off before, and I erased it. The return from the body comes back in here, in these two big veins. And they come and they dump into this area, which is called the right atrium. This blood, of course, is now blue because it doesn't have much oxygen in it. It was given to the cells. It dumps into the atrium, and then it can proceed through here, this other valve, into the right ventricle, where everything starts all over again. And this valve has a name too, we should label it. It's called the tricuspid valve. It's called that because of its shape. So this little valve right here is the tricuspid valve. So what happens is your heart is really a double pump. One side, the left ventricle, is pumping, the right ventricle, is pumping to the lungs. And then it comes back, and the left ventricle gets it and pumps it to the body. Then it comes back into the other side of the heart, and it gets pumped back to the lungs. And it comes back, and it gets pumped to the body. So that's why your heart makes a double beat. It goes bump, bump, because there's two different contractions. The first contraction is a little bit smaller. When you listen to a heart, it goes boom, 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 right? Boom, boom. The second one is the bigger push. So the first little push, actually, when you hear those sounds, you're not hearing the contraction. As soon as this ventricle at the bottom, this right ventricle contracts, watch this carefully. When this right ventricle contracts, the blood is being squirted. Let me just use it's being squirted up into this artery that's going to the lungs, right? So when that happens, it creates a tremendous amount of pressure, and this little valve right here slams shut because it doesn't want blood to go back that way. It wants all the blood to go into the tube, into the pulmonary arteries to go to the lungs. And the slamming of that valve shut, it's basically like flaps. And when they slam shut, they actually make that first noise, thump, of the heart. So the first heart sound we hear, they often call it lubdub. That's what they call it in biology and in medicine. So the lub is the slamming shut of the tricuspid valve as this ventricle contracts, this right ventricle, and squirts the blood towards the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Then, of course, it comes back. So afterwards, it's on its way back this way in the pulmonary veins, which empty into the left atrium. Yes. Okay, so now the blood is in the atrium, and it moves through the one-way mitral valve into the left ventricle. Again, this left ventricle is going to contract hard. And when it does, the mitral valve right here will slam shut, because you don't want blood going back the way it came. And this is the second heart sound, the dub. Dum, dum. It's the slamming shut of that valve as the blood is forced all the way up the aorta and out into the ascending and descending aorta to all the parts of the body. Then, once it's finished doing what it does in the body, it comes back, and we didn't label these pieces, so we should label them right now. It comes back through these two blood vessels. They have a name. They're called the Vena, which stands for vein, Cava, the Vena Cava. Now there's two of them. So the one on top is called the superior Vena Cava, and the one on the bottom is called the inferior Vena Cava. So you can write that on your picture. I won't write it here because we ran out of room. But this one up on top, right here, is the superior, or the top one, superior Vena Cava. And this one down here is the inferior Vena Cava, or Cava. And those bring the blood right into this region right here, into the See the two little holes we drew here and here? Those are the openings for those blood vessels to dump the blood into the right atrium. And then, of course, it can move its way back into the right ventricle, and then it starts all over again. Yeah. Tricuspid valve on the left. So what we can do is we can represent the flow of blood through the heart in a flowchart form once we sort of get all the pieces sort of in our minds, right? But it's a good idea to go through this and watch this picture and watch the blood and imagine how it moves and where it's coming away and where it's coming in order to sort of figure it all out. So let's do a flow chart now to summarize the movement of blood as it goes through the heart. Are we done with the picture? Do you want to wait a minute? We can pause. Okay. So let's just get some space here. And we'll just do this. I'll try to do it in red and blue to show you the points at which the blood is oxygenated. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the heart, right? We're going to start with the right ventricle. So let's get a smaller pen here, and let's put right ventricle. Okay? And we'll put a little box around it. This is blood that is deficient in oxygen. So the first place it goes is it gets pumped to what are called the pulmonary arteries. So let's put down PUL dot arteries. And of course, the pulmonary arteries then send it to, and I'll do this one in black because this is not part of the circulatory system, to the lungs. And once it goes to the lungs, it picks up oxygen, right? So now we'll use red. And then what happens is it comes back to the heart, or towards the heart, into what are called the pulmonary veins. Remember, veins lead back to the heart. The pulmonary veins empty into the other side of the heart, the left atrium. The left atrium then moves everything into the the left ventricle. So from there, the oxygenated blood is going to take a short trip, but what we're going to do here is we're going to put a little valve in here, right? And we're on that side of the heart, that's the mitral valve. So we'll label that the mitral valve. I'm going to use black because you can't really see the yellow. So I'm just going to write mitral valve. And then that blood ends up into the left ventricle. I'm going to run out of room here. The left ventricle then pumps the blood very strongly into the aorta. And the aorta then takes the blood out to the rest of the body. Oh, please don't do that. I don't know why this thing goes crazy on me sometimes. Hang on. I got to find out how to get back to where I was. All right. So the body. That says body. It's covered up a little bit. Bod. Okay. Now, of course, once the blood gets to the bod, right? The cells are extracting the oxygen, the body, the cells are extracting the oxygen from it. So now the blood is less in oxygen. So I'm going to use a blue. Goes into what's called the Vena Cava, which is the large vein that has the two, the superior and the inferior. And that drains into the right, I'm kind of going really small here, the right atrium. And then we go through the right atrium, but in order to get back to the right ventricle, there's another valve. So we'll draw it like that. Back to the right ventricle. And of course, that is the tricuspid valve. So let's go black, small here, and let's just write tricuspid valve. The yellow thing. And that's basically the whole thing, right? Did we miss anything? I don't think so. Let's check. So the right ventricle pumps into the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries lead the blood to the lungs. The lungs then oxygenate the blood and return it to the heart through the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins empty into the left atrium. Then the left atrium passes the blood through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle then contracts strongly and pumps the blood into the aorta, which carries the blood to all the parts of the body. And now, coming back from the body, the blood has been deoxygenized to some degree, so we change the color. It returns to the heart in the vena cava, and then from the vena cava, it empties into the right atrium. Then it passes through the tricuspid valve and back into the right ventricle for the whole process to repeat again. So there is the heart, and how the heart basically moves the blood about the body. The ventricles are very thick-walled and powerful parts of the heart that do the pumping. The atria are more like the receiver parts of the heart. They are muscle, and they do push a little bit to move the blood, but they only have to move it an inch or two, right? It's not moving very far. So it's the ventricles that are the pumping action parts of the heart. The right ventricle is pumping to the lungs, then when it comes back, the left ventricle is pumping to the body. And it just keeps cycling through. And when we hear the lubdub, bump, bump of the heartbeat, what we're listening to is the slamming closed of the valves, the mitral valve and the tricuspid valve. The first one, the lub, is the slamming of the tricuspid valve as the right ventricle contracts. It's a smaller beat because it's only pushing to the lungs. Then, the second thing we hear is the left atrium and the left ventricle, right? The mitral valve that's in between them has to slam shut, because if it didn't, when this contracted to push blood this way, without the valve, the blood would also leak backwards this way. We don't want that. So the valve slams shut and prevents that from happening. So the blood only goes one way in the direction that it's meant to go. And that's the second valve we hear, the more powerful dub sound, lubdub. So the heart continuously does this double pump every beat, double pump every beat. Okay, we'll stop this video here because that's probably enough.